Hey there guys, so today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be testing out the UM760 with the Ryzen 5 7640HS processor across over 24 games. It's going to be a mix of genres and it's going to be a mix of a wide variety of different tests from across the years just so we can get a general idea of the performance. We've already taken a look at this system anyway in the previous video. If you haven't seen that one, check it out here. So let's just jump right on into the game testing. So starting things off, we're taking a look at Assassin's Creed Shadows running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And the performance in this is absolutely disastrous. It's not too surprising though, because this is one of those titles that just has ray tracing enabled even at the lowest in-game graphics settings. There is no way of disabling it. Ray tracing is mandatory, and even though on paper this integrated graphics should be able to do ray tracing, the performance that you get out of it is not going to be passable at all. Thankfully, Sniper Elite Resistance, another title that came out this year, is just far better optimized. Here it is running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and it does not support anything like FSR, so no upscaling whatsoever. And the performance that we get out of this is pretty spectacular. Those 1% lows in FPS averages mean you're going to have an absolutely perfect time playing the game, even if it isn't the best looking game visually with these settings. You do at least have some headroom to mess around with things if you really feel the need to turn up some settings. Next, I took a look at Black Myth Wukong running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR with a base resolution of 66%, and that is 66% of 1080p. But we are not using frame generation, and what we're getting out of here is an FPS average of 40 with 1% lows of 34. What that translates to is, while not a high refresh rate gaming experience, it is a very consistent one. So you could realistically get away with playing the game on here. And while visually it's not going to look the best because of just the really aggressive FSR settings that we're using, considering this is a very recent title, this is a very impressive showing, at least to me. So the next thing I took a look at is the benchmark for Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, and I ran this with the standard laptop graphics, which is essentially the lowest graphics preset you can choose, and FSR is enabled with a dynamic resolution target of 60, and even with all of these settings we only get an FPS average of 46 with 1% lows of 27. For an MMO like this is going to be a pretty playable experience, which is why it did give us a passing score at the end of this, but don't expect a perfect gaming experience. Now, I also took a look at Marvel Rivals running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR with the quality preset, though I did not use FSR frame generation. And you might consider using it yourself. Personally, I'm not a fan of using it in this specific title, but the FPS average and 1% lows that I was getting out of here weren't exactly spectacular for the type of title that this is. An FPS average of 46 certainly isn't terrible, but in those really hectic team fights, it can be very distracting to have such a low FPS. I definitely would have liked to have gotten a higher performance out of this, but considering it's a brand new title, it's pretty impressive that it's doing this well. If you had no other way of playing this game, you could realistically mess around with the graphics settings and resolution enough that you'll be satisfied. So the next thing we're taking a look at is Black Ops 6 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR. That's FSR at the balanced preset. And well, the performance that we were getting out of this wasn't exactly spectacular, though it's passable enough. An FPS average of 57 isn't the most ideal considering how aggressive we went with the graphics settings, but with a 1% low of 45, it does mean that it's going to be a very smooth and consistent experience, even if it's not the highest FPS. A pretty notoriously tough title for a lot of these mini PCs to run is Helldivers 2, and here you can see running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and with the render resolution target set to ultra quality, we at least have a consistent experience, even if it's not going to be the highest FPS. An FPS FPS average of 38 with 1% lows of 32. It's hard to really complain about that. Like I said, it's not going to be the smoothest thing in the world, but it's consistent enough that you're going to have very little to complain about. And considering just how poorly this game has run on other systems, this is a very, very ideal scenario to be in. Now, of course, I also took a look at Counter-Strike 2 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but we did not enable FSR. We disabled that, and that ended up giving us an FPS average of 137 and 1% lows of 86. This is a perfect experience, and really just flexes on most of the competition that it has that are still running on GCN based iGPUs. So think from anything from Ryzen 5000 series and before, their iGPUs just struggle dramatically in this title. And that is just not the case here. We're getting a fantastic result, and at the price point that this comes in, it's one of the best options on the market today. Now, the next thing we're taking a look at is Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty running with the built-in benchmark, and this is running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset, and it gives a surprisingly decent result. An FPS average of 46 with 1% lows of 21 isn't exactly perfect, but for the type of title that this is, it's more than anything a surprising result. And you can, of course, mess around with the FSR settings if you want to try to improve your FPS while also sacrificing some visual quality. And the next title that I'm taking a look at is Company of Heroes 3 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And the result we get out of this is pretty spectacular. An FPS average of 70 with 1% lows of 46. Considering the type of title that this is, I can more than comfortably play on here. In fact, I had a great time playing on here for a little while after doing the benchmark, just because sometimes I don't trust the benchmarks for this type of title. So I just like to play the game itself and see if the results are accurate, and yeah, they really are. I didn't do a full late game playthrough or anything like that, but I did get pretty far in, and I was having a great time. So I also took a look at Combat Master. This, of course, is just a port of a mobile game over to PC, so you would expect to see some high refresh rates, and that is exactly what we're getting. What I like the most about being able to play this game on PC is the fact that since we get such a high FPS, it can be a pretty great benchmark to see if the CPU ends up becoming a limiting factor at all. And for the most part, the GPU remains at such high utilization that we're not really running into any kind of CPU bottleneck, which isn't too surprising to see considering the fact that this is a Zen 4 APU. So the single core performance is pretty spectacular. So the next thing that I took a look at is Tiny Tina's Wonderlands running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And the result that we get out of this is, again, fantastic. An FPS average of 79 with 1% lows at 70. This is going to be a rock solid, smooth experience. It really is the most ideal scenario to have with integrated graphics. And if you hate FSR, you can disable that and take a hit in your performance, obviously, but it's still going to be a great experience. So you're not forced to have to use FSR in this title. I just recommend doing it for the performance increase. And of course, I also took a look at Halo Infinite running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, but it doesn't have any kind of upscaling like FSR. You can do dynamic resolution scaling, but I always disable that. And well, if you're playing the game yourself, you might want to enable that, because I ended up with an FPS average of 47 with 1% lows at 40. And I was playing Firefight here on a relatively decent sized map, so you might get better performance depending on what you're looking to play. But considering that I was playing something that was co-op, the performance here didn't really feel like it was holding me back, and I had a pretty great time. But I can see this FPS becoming a frustration if you're trying to play online in any competitive capacity. So like I said, you might want to consider enabling the dynamic resolution scaling. That might just smooth things out enough for you. But for me personally, I mostly end up playing Firefight anyway, so this wouldn't be an issue. I would continue to just play like this. And as long as I don't have the FPS counter up, I'll likely be very happy with these results. So now we're taking a look at Forza Horizon 5 running with the high graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And the results in this game are spectacular. Forza Horizon 5 is one of those titles that loves to make APUs seem like the greatest thing ever. The results that we get, I mean, that FPS average, those 1% lows, this is remarkable levels of performance. And I always love to see it because this is one of those titles that I really enjoy playing. So the fact that I could get great levels of FPS on pretty much any system is honestly one of the coolest things ever. But now we're taking a look at Riftbreaker, which is a tower defense style game, and it has two built-in benchmarks. I'm taking a look at the CPU benchmark right now, and well, this is a very intense scenario, and we end up with an FPS average of 42 with 1% lows of 20, considering the type of game that this is and the sheer nightmare scenario that we're looking at for this benchmark. This is a pretty great result, and of course it's that combination of Zen 4 paired with RDNA 3 on the graphics that ends up creating a monster of a gaming system that's only $350. It's honestly one of the most impressive systems that I've taken a look at in a while. Now, I did also take a look at Far Cry 6 running with the high graphics settings. We are using FSR at quality, and I do also have the HD textures enabled. And even with all this, we're getting a great result of 53 for the FPS average and 1% lows of 45. Of course, you can drop down the in-game graphics settings to medium if you want to boost your FPS and 1% lows. But even if you're looking to play at high, you can do that comfortably. And as long as you upgrade this system to 32 gigabytes of RAM, you're more than welcome to max out the textures on most games, and you're going to have a great result. Of course, I did also take a look at Returnal, and that was running at the lowest in-game graphics settings with FSR set to quality. And well, this continues to be one of those titles that brings mini PCs to their knees, because we got an FPS average of 37 with 1% lows of 24. A pretty disastrous result that means you're not realistically going to be able to play this title. Taking a look at Hitman World of Assassination running at the lowest in-game graphics settings with FSR set to quality, we get a pretty spectacular result here. With an FPS average of 77 and 1% lows of 60, that means you're going to have a perfect time playing on here, and you have some headroom to mess around with the graphics settings if you don't want to be stuck at the absolute lowest. You can also mess around with FSR to get more aggressive if you want, since this is just at the quality preset. Just know that because of these older implementations of FSR, you very quickly start to notice the effects it has on the visuals past quality. Now, if we jump on into Gears Tactics with the lowest in-game graphics settings, you can see that the level of performance that we get out of this thing is pretty spectacular. Considering we don't have to rely on any form of upscaling, getting an FPS average of 73 with 1% lows of 64 means that this is going to be a buttery smooth gaming experience. And it's great to see, considering that even at the lowest in-game graphics settings, the visuals do not look terrible. It manages to maintain its aesthetic, and it doesn't really seem to compromise much in any area. It's pretty much the best result you could ask for. Now, if we take a look at Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, the results here are spectacular. An FPS average of 145 with 1% lows of 113 effectively mean that you're going to have a perfect experience playing this game no matter what. You have the headroom here to turn things up to medium. You are going to take a pretty noticeable hit in your FPS average and your 1% lows, but that won't matter unless you're using a high refresh rate display. Though with how fluid this game feels when you're playing at this high of an FPS, I can completely understand if you're willing to play with the potato quality settings, as long as you're able to get a high refresh rate, because when you're playing through the game, it feels incredible. And I also took a look at Rainbow Six Siege running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we are using FSR, and it's FSR 2.0 at the quality preset. And well, we get an incredible result here where we get an FPS average of 126 and 1% lows of 105. This is about the most ideal scenario that you could ask for. If you have a high refresh rate display, you're going to be able to take full advantage of that. And this is the perfect game to pair with a setup like this. So overall, a great showing. Another title that surprisingly impressed me was Metro Exodus, here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we did end up with an FPS average of 75 and 1% lows of 47. That's a pretty fantastic result in comparison to what you would get on a very similarly priced system with a Ryzen 7 5800H. The fact that we have access to RDNA 3 really makes this very competitive at this price point. Now jumping over to World War Z Aftermath, you can see here running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and using FSR at the ultra quality preset. We don't quite hit a 60 FPS average, and this is using Vulkan as the API instead of DirectX 11. While an FPS average of 59 is pretty solid, 1% lows of 38 aren't exactly the most ideal, but the frame time charts are still consistent enough that you will have a good experience playing this. And next up is Civilization 6 running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and this is the turn time test. So it simulates a late game scenario to let you know what is the average time in between the turns. Something that really matters a lot in a game like this, more so than your FPS. And well, I ended up getting a score of an average turn time of 28.7 seconds. This is a really fantastic result, and it really shows an advantage that you get from going with a Zen 4 processor as opposed to a higher core count Zen 3 or Zen 3 Plus APU. And next up is Deep Rock Galactic running with the medium graphics settings, and we are using FSR at the quality preset. And with these graphics settings, we're able to get an FPS that is in the triple digits, though the 1% lows leave a little bit to be desired. They're still high enough that you're going to have a very nice, very consistent experience on here. And this is just the kind of title that pairs very well with a mini PC like this, especially if you just want to have some spare computers around if you ever have friends that come over and you just want an easy way to boot up some co-op games. You're going to get some great results in a lot of titles like that. And if we jump on over to Batman Arkham Knight, you can see it here running at 1080p with the medium graphics settings, and we get a pretty decent result here. An FPS average of 59 is pretty rock solid, especially when you pair that with 1% lows of 45. You'll see that the frame time chart looks fantastic throughout this run, and that means you're going to have a very smooth, very consistent experience. And while it's not high refresh rate, visually speaking, it looks pretty great while maintaining a good level of FPS. And at this point, we've gone back far enough that the AAA titles can run beautifully on pretty much anything. Here you have Alien Isolation running at the ultra graphics settings at 1080p, and well, that gives us an FPS average of 97 and 1% lows of 73. This is one of those titles that runs really well on practically any system, and because of that, even a $350 mini PC like this is able to get an FPS that average that is almost at 100. And yes, I know it is a AAA title that is over a decade old, but if you ever played this game on console, you never played it at the full 1080p resolution. So you're effectively getting almost like a remastered experience off of a very small little system. And now the last game that we're taking a look at is Bioshock Infinite running with the medium graphics settings. And in all honesty, medium, I was playing it too conservative. I could have turned this up to high or very high, maybe even ultra, but honestly, there's just such diminishing returns to all of that you're better off just getting a high refresh rate gaming experience out of this. But you do have the headroom to mess around with the settings there because, you know, with an FPS average of 110 and 1% lows of 87, this is going to be a rock solid experience. It's really one of the biggest benefits of having an iGPU that is this powerful. You can go back to older PC titles that you might have not ever played or thought about playing, but you just didn't have the right system for it at the time, or maybe you played it on an Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 3, so you've never experienced it at 1080p. You're able to do that in a lot of titles and get very high graphics settings out of them. Alright, so after all that testing, it becomes very clear that this system is a powerhouse. And at $350, if gaming performance is what you're after, it's a no-brainer. And the best part really is the fact that it doesn't fall behind much at at all when it comes to the single core performance and the multi-core. But the single core is what matters the most because that's what's going to affect most of your day-to-day tasks. And the fact that this has single core performance that is pretty much the same as all the other Zen 4 processors pretty much means that you are going to have a powerhouse right here. Might not have as many cores as the older Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9 processors, but the lead that it has in the single core performance is going to make your day-to-day experience better. But of course, we still need to compare this system against the previous generation Ryzen 5 6600H, so that is the next video that you're going to be seeing, so stay tuned for that. I'll catch you guys in the next one.